reports from London. Tom, thank you so much. Now it is over to Seamus with more on Canada's record on human rights. Shane.
Thank you, Mercy. Well, a new report card that takes a look at Canada's record on human rights is set to be released today. The report examines Canada's efforts as a member of the UN to promote democracy and fight for the victims of the world's worst regimes. The scorecard will be presented to MPs in the House of Commons later this morning. Joining us now from Ottawa is the Executive Director of UN Watch, Hillel Neuer. Mr. Neuer, thank you very much for joining us.
Good to be here, Seamus.
How does Canada score?
Well, comparatively, out of 47 members of the Human Rights Council, Canada ranks first, according to our report, in standing up to support human rights and defend democratic principles. That's the good news. There's other news, too, which is that, objectively, from the perspective of victims of the world's worst regimes, there's far more Canada can do to speak out on their behalf. And
there are some structural problems too. When you look at the Human Rights Council, which for those who don't know, and I did not know this, has replaced the UN Commission on Human Rights, which many Canadians are familiar with. I mean, some of the members, some of the seats of these 47 members who make up the HRC are not democratic. They're repressive. I mean, Saudi Arabia, China, Cuba, Belarus. I mean, what are we comparing ourselves to when we're number one, I guess, is the question.
That's right. Well, that's a good question. The number one is from all 47. It includes at least 11 solid democracies and others that are less established but nevertheless are democracies. So it is an accomplishment. But you're right to talk about the composition. Human rights at the United Nations is under assault. There is an alliance of increasingly brazen regimes that are seeking not only to spoil needed reforms, and you're right, it's a new Human Rights Council, but they're actually trying to undermine the few existing mechanisms of human rights protection. And so our report asks, where does Canada stand? And it stands in support of the principles. And there's about 3 key areas that we looked at. One is standing up for victims of genocide. And Sudan, Canada has been a leading voice for victims of Darfur. And Canada was responsible for calling a special session on Darfur. Unfortunately, it hasn't led to much.
So I guess if you were to look at where we can improve, is it follow through? Is it should we be taking on more than we are?
Well, absolutely. Canada is doing better than others, but there's far more it can do. Out of 19 of the worst regimes, we found out Canada was silent on 13 of them. It was silent for repression in China, for Cuba, where journalists are jailed for speaking the truth, in Saudi Arabia, where women can't vote or drive a car. Canada said nothing at the Human Rights Council. It said nothing at the General Assembly. And we're urging Canada to do far more.
Don't you think, though, I mean, there's been some controversy over the Prime Minister's stand on human rights with China particularly. I mean, do you give the government any credit for that?
Well, we give the government credit for what it does in Ottawa, but we're really looking at the United Nations.
Right,
it's the international arena, and there are special mechanisms there. And what happens at the United Nations is what we're looking at today.
Mr. Neuer, thank you very much. Appreciate this. Very interesting.
Well, my pleasure.
Coming up on Canada AM in 17 minutes, what was it like on the